Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I'm so happy for you guys to be here with me today, and I have a slew of podcasts in the bag that I'm going to be releasing, and I hope that you guys are ready because you guys are going to be getting a lot of good free episodes from me, and today's episode is a lighter, more positive episode, and it's all about self-love and self-care. I have a very special therapist on the show today, Miss Zeahlot Lopez. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and an LPCC. She is the owner of Vita Therapy, and she's a fluent Spanish-speaking Latina, and her expertise is teaching those about self-love, self-care, trauma, relationship challenges, and family conflict. And today she's going to be dropping a lot of gems on how to take care of yourself and love yourself, which I think is something that is very important, especially if you have a history of being in relationships with abusive and toxic people. It's very important to make sure that you reconnect with yourself again. And I'm going to let her talk to you all about that. And before we get into that episode, I just want to remind you to please like, love, and share the podcast. Hit that subscribe button. Leave those positive reviews. I definitely appreciate that. Also, please remember to join our Facebook group, A Date with Darkness Facebook group, where you can join a community and be supported by others who are currently in the process of leaving or recovering or healing from a toxic and abusive relationship. And now, without further ado, here's Miss Lopez. Hi, Zeahlot. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Natalie, for having me.
You are quite welcome. I'm so glad that we were able to connect finally. We've been kind of talking back and forth. You reached out via Instagram and, things got kind of in the way for me, and I know that life just gets crazy. So I'm glad we were able to get you on the show. I'm excited to have you on because you have an interesting topic, which I know that my listeners are going to love. So for my listeners who may not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and who you work with, rather?
Yeah, a little bit about myself. So currently I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice. And normally what I love working with is women working on the I before the we. Really just solidifying themselves, knowing who they are, loving themselves inside and out before meeting the one that they want to commit to and be in a long-term committed relationship with. And I love working with populations that are underrepresented and underserved. So as a Latina, as a woman of color, just being a mental health professional, it's so yummy to work with other women who are of color.
That's awesome. And tell me a little bit more about your work in terms of finding the I before we. What does that look like?
Yeah, sometimes it gets a little complicated and confusing of like, what is this, right? But I'm a firm believer that if we don't have self-love and we don't know ourselves, how can we give ourselves to other? It's the idea that we are giving from an empty well versus from a plethora of water available to the thirst that others have. We can only love as much as we love ourselves.
I definitely agree with that. And I work a lot with people, with women especially, who have been victims of narcissistic abuse. And I do think that this comes up a lot in terms of people are constantly looking for validation, of self-worth from others. So they're constantly trying to seek approval. And so when we get to the self-love component in terms of you validating yourself, a lot of the women that I work with have a lot of trouble with that.
Mm. Yeah.
Can you tell me where that comes from in terms of, people looking externally for validation and for love before looking internally?
Yeah, I'll definitely take it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mm.
That beautiful pyramid that looks like the food pyramid when we were children about, getting enough veggies or meats.
Yeah.
So Maslow's hierarchy of needs really, it points out the importance of love, belonging, acceptance, and just knowing that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves.
Mm.
And that's definitely in the basic needs, the emotional needs that Maslow highlights. And if some of those needs have not been met, we're going to erroneously look for it in other places from others rather than ourselves. So for me, the biggest thing is providing education, whether it be through books, podcasts, YouTube channels, anything, to help individuals understand how important it is to feed that first. And really say, okay, wait a minute, is it belonging that I'm missing? Is it acceptance? Is it validation? Self-reflection, really, and just allowing that space to happen and flow.
Right. So love, especially when you talk about applying it towards yourself, love in general is such a little word, but it has a big meaning. Let's
Yes.
take it back and actually define what love is. How would you define what love is?
That's a great question. I've been asked this a couple times and I've tried to wrap my head around this. The best conclusion I've come to is love is not love because. Love is. I love you when. I love you if. Love is, in its most beautiful form, unconditional.
Mm. Mm. That's amazing. And so when we're thinking about love and people they're at a loss of where it is or how to find it and apply it to themselves. How do they even begin to learn how to love themselves? Walk me through how let's back it up before then, because I feel like, there's some people that don't even know that they're deficient in self-love. So if someone's listening to the show and they're not even kind of aware that they're lacking self-love, can you talk a little bit about what are some signs or symptoms that one could gauge and say, okay, maybe I do have some problems with self-love or self-worth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that because it's about the signs, right? We love signs of stop and go and slow down. So
Yeah.
one of the biggest signs that really stands out for a lot of the people I work with, or just women in general, conversations, is what are you attracting? So I'm a firm believer that we attract what we are. And one of the most wisest men I have ever heard speak told me that we date according to our self-esteem. And that is a
Mm.
big teller of where you're at with yourself. If you are attracting someone that doesn't treat you right, doesn't respect and honor the queen that you are, what is that saying about yourself? What are the standards? What are your limits? And most importantly, your boundaries.
Mm.
Boundaries are so important in correlation with self-love. If we don't have boundaries for others, how are they going to know what is okay with us and what's not? And that goes right back into self-love. So if we have different areas of our lives that are spilling into each other, then that's a big red flag. The way we do one thing is usually the way we do everything.
Mm.
Self-love is reflected in all these areas, not only work, with family, the kids, romantically, and with friendships.
Mm.
Self-love spills into all these areas.
Mm. So basically, what you're saying, essentially, to wrap it up, is your vibe attracts your tribe.
That's right, girl. Yes. That's right. Yes. Your vibe does attract your tribe. Absolutely. And we
Yeah.
have to ask ourselves, what is our vibe?
Yeah.
People are like radio stations and they tune into one to another. But if there's two different stations, you're going to have static. And that static creates pain, creates confusion, creates what is thisness within relationship. When two people are on the same vibe, it's this beautiful music. It's this tune that you just hear clearly over the radio station.
Mm. So
Yeah.
that's very powerful there. So, essentially, and it's an old verbiage actually, that how you feel, you're actually attracting how you feel. And so I think in short terms, when you have people that start generalizing or making those generalizations like all women are this or all men are this, I can't trust any man, or I can't those kind of things. Is that really, you're saying that's more of a reflection of how you feel about yourself? Because most people who make those statements, it actually is a projection inward.
Absolutely. It's the world is a reflection of what we manifest and what we create. And the biggest thing that I hear very often with women that I work with is in partners that they choose, regardless of their orientation or their choice of who to
Yeah.
love. It's this partner is horrible. They don't meet my needs. They don't do this. Yet, what are you not okay with and what are you okay with? Building the communication in the I statements. I feel loved and honored when you do this, versus that they don't express it at all and then it manifests inward. And then it's self-hate, it's self-loathing.
I was doing another show where I was talking with a lady, and another therapist, and she was talking about how people parent according to their trauma, meaning that parents raise their kids in the way that they felt that they should have been raised, or based upon what they were lacking. I'm also wondering too, if you're saying some similar concept here in terms of that, people date or they're attracting or maybe even working based upon their trauma. And so even if you have essentially, basically, you might want to feel like, oh, here's this person over here that I need to love them. They need this. They haven't had enough of that. So you're actually putting on to them, something in which you feel, something which you also felt traumatized about at some point in life. And so that's part of the attraction as well.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big believer in the imago theory and Harville Hendricks on we unconsciously
Yeah.
date our parents, the good and negative qualities of each of our, and I won't even say parents, but our caretakers. Because sometimes it may be auntie, it might be grandma, somebody taking care of these babies, and their qualities are what we unconsciously look for in the other partners. And then when those partners don't meet our needs, we are much more in a wounded space than we are in a healed space. More so, it's understanding how can I have much more reparative experiences than wounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders too, how much of that is like innate or as a product of grooming, meaning that there's some comfort in the dysfunction because maybe, for example, people were raised in a dysfunctional childhood or a dysfunctional family. And so they're naturally attracted to dysfunctional people, not because they want to be, but that's just kind of what they've been conditioned to be around.
Absolutely. And I think that goes even deeper just into a woman and how she views herself and honors herself. And what I mean by this is, before I was a psychotherapist, I was a licensed cosmetologist. And I worked with women, I've been licensed 13 years and I do their brows on fleek. I get them ready for their weddings and their special events. And in speaking with these women, I realized that they have so much beauty on the inside. It's only it's reflecting and just gearing out that we see. Like a little blush will only make it better. But I'm in LA and I know that there is no shortage of beautiful women here.
Yeah.
But I have met some souls deep inside that need some work.
Yeah.
And it's women knowing that it's everything. It's holistically the beauty that she radiates. What is that self-worth that she brings to the table? Many women, I think, especially of color, erroneously, we are fed these ideas from society. We are not beautiful because we have this plethora of melanin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we internalize that. We take that in, especially since we're children. I remember being a little girl and going to the store, and there wasn't a doll that looked like me.
Yeah.
There just wasn't. They were all blonde and blue-eyed, and as beautiful as that is, as any human is, I could not identify.
Yeah.
And it's knowing that there's a tribe out there of women that are feeling the same way at some point or another in their life.
And I'm glad that you brought up being a woman of color, because I also think there's an extra layer to self-love that's not really discussed with women of color, in terms of actually not liking being a person of color. So maybe not even liking your melanin, the fact that you're actually Black, or the fact that you're actually brown, or what that actually represents. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely identity, but also knowing who you are and is that a reflection of you. So as we know, as psychotherapists, there's this dynamic between the independence, but also collective of where I'm coming from, the family, the background, the ancestral tree that's branching out, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost kind of recreating yourself, but knowing who you are and being comfortable with that. I
Mm.
think that for a lot of women of color, we have these ideas that are passed down from our mothers, our grandmothers, our great grandmas of what a woman's worth will continue with her physically. We're constantly told, like, even humorously, my mama has told me, like, girl, your ovaries have dust, you need to get married, like, what's wrong with you going to school, you need to get cooking, you need to get married. And it's the worth of the external versus the interior. It's the, you're only getting older, what if men later don't find you as attractive?
Yeah.
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 Part of me also wonders, I think also too for me that society plays a big part in that for women of color. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the lack of seeing us in magazines and in roles like this, right? Therapists on TV, or when we are on TV, it's usually a messy situation and we don't know how to carry ourselves or we're overly exposed. And there's a lot of negative images out there. So I do think that on top of that, society, American society in general, has a negative portrayal of women of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a lack of representation. You're absolutely
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And so even with all of that said, I do think it's like doubly hard to try to find to maintain self-love because of we're being fed subliminal messages, if you want to call it that, or maybe something else, that we're not as attractive because of the color, or we're not as worthy or deserving because of the color. So that is a message that's out there. Yes, there's a lot more awareness now, but still we have a long way to go. I mean, even in our own profession, Psychology Today, a very nationally known magazine, doesn't have women of color on the cover. So women of color don't have mental health, don't have this kind of stuff. So there's no portrayal of that. And not to put that on the spot, but that's just one sign of something where we don't even exist within our own field.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So with that extra layer, walk me through, Zeahlot, how a woman of color can, if she's lacking self-love, how she can start to love herself again.
I love this question, and I always revert back to the inner child we have inside. Now, this
Mm,
little girl comes out to play with whatever it is this woman loves, whether it be buying shoes, some candy, some desserts. But
mm,
this woman also, or this little girl also comes out inside us when we're triggered, when we're wounded, when we're
mm,
hurt, when we are rejected by a partner that we really wanted, when we are rejected by mama that says, you ain't doing right, girl, what's wrong with you, right?
mhm,
And you need to speak to her. You literally need to sit next to her and be like, baby girl, what's wrong? What's going on? What are you feeling? If you avoid that little girl inside you, there will be no collective there. There needs
mm,
to be healing when that started. I
yeah.
can be very specific in remembering the very first time, and I was 8 years old, when I understood that I looked different from other girls in my classroom,
Mm,
that I spoke a different language than them.
mm,
And the understanding, the undertone, the denotation that I was less than
mm,
because I had dark hair, because my hair was naturally the way it is, because
mm,
I had melanin all year round, not
mm,
just summertime fine, you know?
mhm,
And it's sitting with yourself and really asking, when did these initial thoughts originate? When was the first time I understood I wasn't quote unquote beautiful? When is the first time I was told a brown woman or a black woman is not beautiful?
mm.
Asking those deeper questions.
Wow. So asking those deeper questions, and then what do you do with that information? Like what's the next steps in terms of what they do with that? I mean,
Yeah.
that can be particularly hurtful to really kind of
Go there.
Yeah, go there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that every woman knows when she's ready and when she's not, and that's perfectly okay. I'm a big believer of just meeting people where they're at, but also meeting ourselves. Like, hey, how is this sitting with you? Talking with yourself. Some
Mm-hmm.
things that have really helped myself, people I know, friends, girlfriends. One is journaling. And journaling can be done in different modalities. A lot of people think that it's pen to paper or pencil to paper. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. We could write our feelings. There's beautiful technology where we can voice memo. We could just talk with ourselves, reflect back on it. Maybe when we're in a space and time and be like, did I say that? Like, was that me? And taking it even a step further is this. I love video journaling because
Mm-hmm.
your facial affect, your tone, your voice, you literally will see yourself. I look back on video journaling I did years ago and I'm like, wow, I've grown from that woman. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing to see your progress. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not to share with anybody or to post. Social media is just for you. It's this secret, private relationship you have with yourself.
That's a good point to bring in. There's a lot of people who are very camera shy, but I do think that there's something to that because you can there's a lot to be said for the way you feel showing up and how you appear.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, even just in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak to other people, even your posture can say a lot about how you're feeling. And not to say that how you're feeling is completely superficial, meaning that you always see it, because that's not true. But I do think that there's something to be said for that. Any other self love or self growth exercises that you can recommend for women who are lacking the self love component?
Yes. Okay. So two things. I'm a bookworm for sure. So
Okay.
I love bibliotherapy and just really understanding like what is this person saying, and it's great, especially if you watch videos on books that are reviewed.
Yeah.
So The Mastery of Love. It's my favorite book by Don Miguel Ruiz. This is
Uh,
an amazing book because it really teaches what
mhm.
is self-love, and I think it's the closest thing I've come across to explain the best way to have a relationship with yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Uh,
some practical homework that I love is this. Every time that I spend time with someone, whether it be my mama, a best friend, a romantic interest, I check myself first and I ask, Z, what you are requiring of them, is it something you can give to yourself in this manner? If
mhm.
I expect, or not expect, let's use that word with hope. If I'm hoping that a romantic interest can spend, let's say, 3 to 4 hours with me, can
Mhm.
I first spend 3 to 4 hours with myself? No cell phone, no Facebook, nothing. Disconnected
Mhm.
from anything and just being with myself.
Mhm.
And if the answer is no, then I probably shouldn't do that with another person.
Mhm. That's an interesting one. I like that one, that you
Mhm.
shouldn't have expectations from other people, but it's so true and very refreshing that you would even say that. And then how do we know if we're struggling with self-love? How do we know, if, especially if it's something that we're working on it, that we're actually making some traction?
Oh, yes. So, yes, the proof is in the pudding, right? Okay. So, the proof we want to see is this. There's a huge difference between isolation, loneliness, and solitude. If
Mm,
you, okay, there's a big difference between being there, being alone, and then being with yourself.
mm,
When you are with yourself, you are fully 100% in presence with yourself, and you have solitude. You enjoy your company. You laugh at your own jokes and you say, yes, I'm on fleek today. Yes, I am popping.
yeah.
Versus, versus when you are feeling alone or you are feeling in isolation, you are yearning to be with another to fill that hole that you need to fill yourself. So that's the biggest test. Do I feel that I am with myself, or do I feel that I am alone?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of people that do not like being alone.
That's right.
There's something about sitting with yourself for some people that is incredibly frightening. What is that about?
It's facing our biggest fears. It's facing the shadow self, the lost self, the part of ourselves that for some form or another, whether it be trauma, our experiences, our past, has created that hasn't been worked on. I always think back to analogies such as it's the it's the food that's rotting in the fridge. And we all know that if we don't remove that food, it's going to infect the rest of the yumminess in
Mm,
there.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same with ourselves. A girl cannot be on fleek and beautiful if she's not clean all around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's awesome. Once we start working on ourselves, what should we do with all the people around us that may not be so good for us once, because
Yeah.
in therapy, when you start working on yourself and undoing some of that hard wiring, you're going to change and the relationships around you will change. But if some of those relationships, such as caregivers, are not so good to us, and they're part of the reason why we were hardwired the way we are, what should we do about those
Yeah.
relationships that become toxic to us
Yeah.
when we get to that next level?
What comes to me naturally is this. There's a big difference between being with and then being inspired by, um, being intentional with who is in your life. So if we make space, so there's people that are like, oh, you changed, like what's wrong with you? Like you, this new person, like new hair, new me. But realistically, you're growing, you're becoming this new, beautiful person. If you keep the old vibe around, you're not making space for new vibes. Naturally, as you level up and you become this beautiful person inside and out, you're naturally going to attract other people, especially other women that are of your value, of your worth, of your mindset. But if you're keeping attached, not connected, attached to others that are not at your level, you're not making space. So I would naturally just say be mindful and be intentional with your relationships and the space you're holding.
Right. The other thing that I want to ask about is that I've always been curious, in terms of what someone like yourself would say about this. What about daily affirmations and things like that? What do you think about those in terms of gaining that self-awareness or self-love and self-kindness?
Yeah, there's so much power to the spoken word. And I think that the more and more we hear something, we have to, at some point, believe it. So it's telling our, like, I do this all the time with the spoken word, specifically with parking in LA, because Lord knows there is no parking in Los Angeles. So every time I'm going somewhere and I might be running a minute or two late, I say, I will find parking. On top of that, the meter is already going to be paid. And on top of that, it's going to be VIP parking. It's going to be right in front. And I have to tell you, Dr. Natalie, it happens. I find VIP parking, and it is the spoken word. The universe is a menu.
Okay.
Our job is to know what it is we want and then order.
I like that. So you're basically going from, again, manifestation. You basically have to speak these things into existence.
Absolutely. My hair is going to be beautiful today. It's going to be voluminous. It's just going to be everything. And that's it. I have set the tone for the day. And even if it's not that great and popping, I know that I love my hair. And that's what matters.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yes.
That's fantastic. And I do like the idea of manifestation, and I do think that there's some truth to that. So that's amazing. And I also think there's some truth, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, on being kind and loving to other people. So, and I want to kind of talk about that because some people think that, okay, I get into these relationships where I give my all, right? And I'm great to this person. I do, I've done everything that I can be, and then I get the crapshoot in the end. And so I do think that there's a line that can be drawn between being kind and attracting kinder people versus doing way too much. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. To that, I will say that Dr. Townsend has an amazing book. It's Dating with Boundaries.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that book just because it reiterates the importance of boundaries and limits and knowing what is okay with us.
Yes. But I also think, too, what I was getting at is that if you say more kind things, that sometimes when we're not feeling good, we don't say good things, we don't treat other people well. But I do think when we say more positive things to other people, we also can start to speak more positively to ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. My favorite for that one that I've implemented into my life personally is instead of apologizing, sorry, I'm late, I'll say, thank you for your patience. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So, yeah, reframing words that, um, what do you call, sorry, I forget what kind of word you call that, but sort of reframing it so that it has a positive spin on it.
Yeah. It's more coming from a place of gratitude versus regret.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
appreciate your patience. I appreciate you waiting. I appreciate you being here on time. I appreciate you holding the soup for me while I was getting cold.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'm wondering too, in terms of self-love, is that something that you feel like you should intentionally carve out time for every day? Like almost kind of like dating or setting limits with everything else. When you're thinking about, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, or I need to do this for myself. Is that something you need to be intentional with?
Absolutely. I believe in manifesting that into dating myself first in order to know what I like, what I enjoy. If I'm going out intentionally with a romantic interest and I wouldn't enjoy that anyways by myself, I question why I'm doing it. Am I doing it for them or am I doing it for me? Implementing self-care, dating yourself, it's so important. It's part of creating the best form of you before you meet that person.
Hmm. And out of curiosity, and I so agree with that, but I'm curious for you. Um, are there any role models or women that you've even seen, even in mainstream media, that are representational of women who you think practice self love and they just got it? They are the epitome of what you were talking about.
I think what I see is a little part of me and every woman that I meet and I connect with. Not so much attached, but I connect with. And secretly, Oprah's been my mentor. She is. She just don't know it. Yes. Yes. And I love Oprah because, you know, in the interviews that I've watched, they're extremely raw in just how she says how she struggled with certain challenges in her life. And I
Mhm.
can connect with that. And I say, wow, this woman is so successful, so amazing, so everything. And she is still human. It's all human at the end of the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there someone who practices self love exercises that you kind of idolize or that you kind of reference to for other women?
Yes, I actually have a close friend and she's amazing. She has the I am statements. She laminated and put it in her shower. So every morning she sees her affirmations. Yeah. Yes.
I love it. Shout out to friend who put I am statements in her shower. That's pretty
Yes.
amazing.
Mhm.
That is so awesome. On another note, though, specifically for women of color, if um, self love is something they struggle with, especially with reference to their culture or their skin color, because I do think that's another element that should be added in there.
Mhm.
What are some things that they can do to find love in that area? Because I think that sets them apart from other people when it comes to cultural differences and things like that. What are some things that we can be doing to address that?
Great question. And I think I could speak only from a place of my own experience as a
Sure.
Latina. And
Yeah.
in my culture, we also have a dynamic of skin shade and tone. Absolutely, I've come across the lighter you are, the more accepted, the more beautiful you are. Versus
Mm,
the darker tone, the more melanin, the more your darker eye color, your darker hair color makes you
mm,
less preferable, less attractive.
mhm,
And for me, I really have to push against that because as a little girl, I was the only one in my classroom with a year-round tan.
mhm,
I really had to just grow up and see, wait a minute, beauty comes in all types of shapes and sizes and shades. So
mhm,
for me, what really hit it is when I was okay with myself, every part of my body. And when a
mhm,
woman gets to a point where she loves herself, it naturally attracts others that say, hey, there's somebody that likes that part of you too.
mhm. And I'm kind of wondering about what it takes to get to that part, that portion where you do love every part of your body, where you do love your hair, where you do love your melanin and all of those things. Is there something that you can recommend for women who are struggling with that? Because I do think that's an added element that we see, especially in therapy.
Yeah, I think it's how they say, if you don't know the beast, you won't know how to beat it. So it's identifying what you do love about yourself first and working from the strengths perspective, just like we do in
Mhm.
session in the sacred space. It's knowing what can you start with and grow from there. So an activity that may help or may not is every single day identify one thing you do well and one thing you like about yourself physically. So if it's actually your appearance that you're struggling with the most, it's one a day. Just like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, one affirmation a day or one identification of beauty for you will increase that.
I love it.
One of the most powerful questions I have ever asked a woman is I will literally hold a mirror up to her and I will say, what do you see? Tell me, what do you see in the mirror? And I will tell her, you were only allowed to speak kind words to yourself. Most women will just start to cry because they maybe shout out one or two and that's it. I've had some women that's very powerful, 4 sessions in, 6 sessions in. Later, they're like, ooh, my eyebrows look good. My lips look nice today. Like my shape, I'm curvy and I love it. They're owning themselves little by little. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I imagine it's very humanizing when you hold it up and they can only say 1 or 2 things. Right? Yeah. Wow. So that's so amazing. That's awesome. So, and I'm wondering too, for love, I know a lot of people, they struggle with sitting with working through self-love, and especially millennials. They want it right now.
Yes. The instant gratification versus
versus the waiting. What do you say about that versus, the timeline or to acquiring love and things like that? What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think that if a person doesn't have patience and doesn't know that waiting game, they won't create grit. Grit is what's really going to get you through those hard times in a relationship. Interestingly, what I find with millennials is that they confuse fake love for real love or acceptance and validation. Nowadays, you're seeing a lot of influence and a lot of influx with social media posts. And the more likes or followers you have, the more people like you, the more validation you feel. But it's fake. It's not real. It's a mask that's put onto something else. So it's really knowing, once again, the intention and the purpose of why am I putting this out there? Do I need instant gratification? The very moment that I post this, what am I looking for? Am I looking for validation, acceptance, belonging? Asking yourself that question.
Yeah, and I recently did an interview with someone, another therapist, who mentioned how people do get caught up in social media, and how that then turns to value and self-worth. I am curious what your recommendations are about that, as well as looking for that validation from social media, because that's a very real thing. That can, I've known people that messes up their entire week.
Yes.
So I'm curious what you recommend for your folks that come walking through your door that says, this kind of really bummed me out. I didn't get this many likes or hearts or whatever. What do you say to them?
I definitely bring up, just in practical terms, time management and prioritization. So I say, let's really take a look at this. Let's take a step back. How much time are you spending on social media? And then they'll tell me. And I say, oh, well, if they say, I don't know, no worries. Let's use a tracker that will set a time for how much you're spending on social media. Let's just say on an average a day, you're spending 3 hours. Of those 3 hours, how much of that time can you allocate to discovering yourself, improving yourself, and or reading about this, and this, and self-love? And if they're open to it, they realize, where are my priorities? There's a big difference between I'm too busy for that, I don't have time for that, and that's not my priority. So I reflect back in session and I ask them, is self-love, self-worthiness, and self-validation a priority for you? Why are we here?
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you believe, Gary Chapman wrote about the 5 love languages for couples. Do you believe we have a love language for ourselves?
Absolutely, yes. I am a firm believer in that.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I have to say that for myself personally, my main love language is acts of service. This is what speaks volumes to me, behavior. Behavior says much more than words do for me. And for myself, it's the same thing. It's what have you done for yourself today? How much self-care have you blocked out of your day? Did you take those extra minutes in the shower? Did you hug yourself? Did you feel every part of your body and say, girl, you got this? I love you. Like, have I hugged myself today? So for
Mhm.
me, I'd say it's a sprinkle of physical affection with myself, but also doing. It's acts of service.
I love it. Great. So that's awesome. I think our listeners are really going to love this. And I so appreciate you coming on to talk about this. You mentioned resources, the books that you mentioned, and I'll be sure to include those in the show notes. Any other resources that you want to recommend?
Yes, I have to say that our colleagues are doing some amazing things. And some of the most beautiful websites that women of color can go and get help on are Therapy for Latinx, and that's for Latinos looking for Latino clinicians, Therapy for Black Girls, and
Mm-hmm.
then most recently, Melanin and Mental Health. And I
Yeah.
love this. I am listed on every single one of these directories. And I
Uh-huh.
have to tell you, there are amazing colleagues on there. There are people that are ready to hear you out. And yes, they have a year round tan. I love that. Yes, yes, they're representing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Zeahlot, where can people find you if they want to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, I'm super open to connecting, and I love big talk. I love big conversations.
Mm.
They can reach out through either my website, my Instagram, my Facebook, my YouTube, and it's all across the board the same social media handle, which is Vida Therapy. That's VIDA, and Vida means life in Spanish. And if life
Mhm.
isn't therapy in itself, I don't know what is.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And do you have any sort of special projects or anything like that are coming up that people can support you with or show up and come see you or anything like that?
Yes, thank you. So currently what I'm working on is a lot more workshops for women, and
Mm.
we know them holidays are coming. So I'm going
Yeah.
to start doing a workshop on women with difficult mothers.
Yeah.
Because sometimes our mamas, they love us and it's big. It's
Yeah.
big. So yeah, that's what I'll be
What-
working on.
What's a difficult mother? If you know, for your workshop for women who are listening and they're maybe in Los Angeles area or they're thinking
Yeah.
about it, when you say a difficult mother, what do you mean by that?
A difficult mother to me is defined by a mom that means well, but the outcome is not as such. It's much more wounding experiences with mom than they are healing. And I am a firm believer that we can shift that. We can have the relationship we want with our mothers. It doesn't
Okay.
have to be a hurtful, toxic, he said, she said, tit tit for tat relationship.
Okay. So
Yeah.
is this a workshop for daughters and moms to come together almost like a dyad?
That's a great question. I think what I envision is much more of the receiver, much more of the women struggling with their own relationship with their mother.
I see. I see.
Yes.
Awesome. So we'll be looking for that coming soon, right?
Yes. Yes.
Amazing. Well, I love the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for coming on and doing this interview. I think it was great, and I know the listeners will love it.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Natalie. And I
Mhm.
appreciate your work and just putting this out there. Women need this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought that was a really positive and enlightening episode. Very informative and very kind and respectful. Let me know what your thoughts are on this episode. Please email me at adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to come on over and join that Facebook group, A Date with Darkness, and Facebook, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter and all the other social media handles, including Facebook. And I appreciate that. So, and thank you so very much for spending this last hour and listening to the show. I so appreciate you. And until next time, be well.